Hi, I'm Jessica Sipovic, training specialist with the Illinois Center for Transition and Work at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Today, we're going to talk about yeah, but scenarios. And you might be wondering, what does that mean? It's really common that we're talking to schools and teaching staff and community rehab partners across the state about how we set our students and young people with disabilities up for employment success. And commonly, we hear statements with, yeah, but dot, dot, dot. And it's really putting limitations on how we sometimes think about or set our students up with employment or work-based learning experiences. Today, we're going to talk about how we reframe those mindsets, how we think a little bit differently. We center our students and their abilities and skills while also addressing challenges and limitations that might lie and really focusing on employment first mindsets. And we think about what our students can do instead of what they can't do. We're excited that you're here today. In today's webinar, Overcoming the Yeah But Mentality and Transition to Employment for Students with Disabilities, we're going to talk about how we recognize and articulate the common yeah but barriers that hinder effective transition planning. We're going to reframe those limiting beliefs and assumptions about students' employment potential. And then we're also going to wrap up by applying problem-solving strategies to develop creative, individualized solutions to common challenges. So what is the yeah, but syndrome? When we're talking about the yeah, but syndrome, we're looking at someone with our eyes, we're not really seeing them with our mind and what we know is going to be in the best interest of the individual. This mindset can make us think of all the things that might go wrong instead of what could go right. And I think what this boils down to is oftentimes in a yeah, but situation, people are framing that as can the student work instead of how can we help the student work, which is really what we want to accomplish with our conversations today. Instead of putting up those barriers, think about what potential options we might have. So when we think about that, we want to think about how that is going to impact how we are setting our students up for work-based learning experiences, having conversations with them and their family about their employment goals. And as a byproduct of that, we sometimes are setting low expectations by putting up those limitations and those barriers. That's going to lower our students' self-esteem and their confidence when it comes to conversations around employment. It's also going to potentially impact how we schedule and put out experiences and opportunities for them within our transition programs, which might actually limit the exposure that they have to building certain skills and having certain experiences. It might also make that student or that family fearful of just work in general if we're not giving them as much exposure and opportunity as we should. Additionally, it might result in us doubting the capabilities and performance of a student, and might also impact someone's thought of potentially not following through with the skills or experiences that they really, really could be building through different experiences. Here are some of the common yeah buts that we have heard when talking with schools across the state of Illinois. Yeah, but their parents won't let them work. Yeah, but the student has unrealistic employment goals. Yeah, but we don't have transportation to get students to work sites. Yeah, but the student isn't quite ready to work yet. Yeah, but we don't have jobs in our small town. Yeah, but the student has behavior issues. Yeah, but this student has poor hygiene. Yeah, but our school doesn't have a step contract to fund those community-based work experiences. Yeah, but the student's disability is too severe to have a job. I'm sure if you've been around the block in transition services, you've heard one of these, if not all of them, or some iteration in between. There's very common yeah, but statements being made by well-intentioned people. People have been doing this work for a long time. People have been doing this work for a short time. Our families put them up sometimes. Our administrators put them up sometimes. But we want to talk about how we can break some of those down and challenge those assumptions and reframe our mindsets. So when we're challenging these negative assumptions, we want to create a strength-based approach to preparing students for employment. So we really want to shift from that deficit thinking to a strengths-based model. So in this example, yeah, but the student is nonverbal. Okay, well, let's think about how we can shift that to a strength space and think about, yeah, but the student is an excellent visual communicator. That's flipping that on its head. Sure, maybe they're nonverbal, but they do communicate in a visual way that we can leverage as a potential employment benefit or bonus. So we're really focusing on those abilities and not those limitations. And we really want to take a solution-oriented approach when we're thinking about potential employment opportunities, work-based learning exposures, the instruction we're providing, and all the things in between. So here's the framework that we put together on how we might reframe a framework to reframe our mindsets when it comes to this. So we're going to break this down, but the first thing is we're going to lay out the scenario. What's the situation? What's the negative mindset, the yeah, but that we're dealing with? We're going to probe a little bit further and ask some questions about that scenario. We're going to reframe and reconceptualize that situation and then lay out some actionable next steps. So let's look at these a little bit deeper. So in that scenario, that's the situation that we're dealing with. So we're illustrating the challenge faced by educators, families, or students during that transition to employment. This is the story, the case study, if you will. And then we're going to make sure that we're pointing out what the issue is, what the yeah, but is that we really need to reframe and think about differently. We are then going to, throughout this, we are going to provide an example. So I just kind of defined here what the scenario is. And now we're going to use an example for a case study for an individual named Maria. So the scenario for Maria is that she's a high school student with autism. She struggles with social interactions and has a history of avoiding group activities. Her teachers say, yeah, but Maria won't succeed in a workplace because she can't work well with others. So that's our situation here with Maria. The next step in our reframing mindsets framework is to ask questions. So we're going to gather some background information and assume that the student will work and what we need to figure out what we need to make sure we can get that to happen for them. So we're going to ask questions that help better understand the situation, figure out what we tried, what we haven't tried, and potentially identify solutions based on some of the responses we get to those questions. We're going to take into account cultural considerations, of course. There might be some other outlying things beyond our purview that might be impacting why Maria's our example, but why an individual may or may not have a different viewpoint on employment. And then any sort of other context that will frame the situation. So really, we're just going to kind of probe. This is what naturally happens. If I was sitting with you and you said, hey, Jessica, I am dealing with this situation. Here's what's going on. I'm going to naturally say, hey, tell me more about this. What have you tried? What hasn't worked? Have you guys tried this type of approach? Have you talked to so-and-so? You're going to naturally ask these questions. So this is mimicking that kind of natural conversation that we would have if you were coming to me with something, or if you were going peer to peer, and just laying out exactly what the situation is and getting more clarity on how we got here to potentially pave a way towards a solution. So here's questions I would ask about Maria. What are her strengths and interests and previous successes? What's worked for her in the past? The yeah, but is that she doesn't work well with others. But tell me about where we're at with her. What kind of stuff is she into? What kind of things have worked before? Are there any job roles or environments where limited interaction is acceptable? There's so many job opportunities out there, and there's some where you don't deal with another human being all day, minus maybe a couple of emails with a supervisor. So what might that look like? What kind of options might be available within your community, in Maria's community? Another question I might ask is, how can we support Maria in developing her social skills or adapting to the workplace? So yes, we might explore things that have more limited interactions, but at the same time, she's still going to have to deal with human beings at some point and is going to have to learn to be better with working with others. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about how we can support her employment skill development and help her get more confident in working in authentic work environments, while also building up her social skills and being more adaptive to the work environment. We might also ask, how have we involved Maria in identifying her goals or preferences? Are we making sure that we're setting her up in environments and work experience that are aligned with what she wants to do? Sometimes our students have bad attitudes when they're doing something that they're not pumped about. So it could be beneficial to make sure that what has been done so far, are we involving her and making sure her goals are centered and her preferences and skills and abilities are really at the center of the experiences we're providing? And finally, I might also ask what accommodations or supports can be provided to help Maria succeed. What kind of things have worked in the past? What kind of opportunities do we have to make some workplace accommodations or build in some either national supports or job coaching supports or other things that might set her up for success that we could either put in place or fade away as needed? So we've laid out the scenario, we've asked some questions. So now we kind of have a good understanding of where we're at. So now the next step is to reframe. So we're going to think about how we can change the mindset from that deficit-based, yeah, but to an employment first mindset. We want to view the student's abilities, not limitations, and create an optimistic yet realistic perspective on the situation. That reframing that we're doing here really invites the team and everyone involved to consider alternative approaches, recognizing those opportunities for growth and what sort of challenges we might encounter for creative problem solving in this specific scenario. So we're not ignoring the challenges. We're not pretending they don't exist because that's not going to set anyone up for success, but it's about thinking about how we approach it, focusing on the student's potential and seeking ways to mitigate those barriers creatively. So a realistic next step that focuses on strengths, abilities, interests, putting it in the positive mindset, while also at the same time recognizing, yes, these are real challenges that we need to address, but we still need to be moving in a forward motion and making sure that we're keeping that mindset on really what employment options are possible instead of what's not possible. So in that Maria reframe example that we talked about, and we asked a lot of thoughtful questions because we know that her yeah, but situation is that she's struggling with being successful in work environments because she avoids group activities. She doesn't get along well with others. So that reframe mindset is, here's an example. Maria excels in independent tasks and has a strong attention to detail. We can explore job roles that leverage those strengths, such as data entry, filing, or inventory management, while at the same time also providing gradual opportunities for her to build social skills in a low pressure environment. So this is a great way of rethinking that. It's not about what she can't do. It's about figuring out what she can do. Again, a place that a job opportunity that has more limited social interactions, but we're also not ignoring that challenge. And we're saying, hey, we're going to build your work skills, but we're also going to build your social skills. And they might not have to happen at the same place at the same time. We can work on those social skills in a different environment in kind of the next steps that we're going to talk about here. Generally, those next steps are how we expand on the reframe. Okay. We think about, okay, we reframed it. So now what are we going to do? What are the things that we're going to put in place to shift the experiences, the instruction, the opportunities that the student is happening towards that reframed mindset? So this might include creating an individualized plan, involving additional stakeholders, implementing specific interventions, but it's the actionable steps that we are going to take to move us towards those post-secondary employment goals using the reframed mindset. So it's about moving from the theoretical, yeah, this sounds like a good idea. We can think about their employment opportunities differently, to the actual practice of specific strategies, resources, interventions that we're going to use to support the student's progress towards that employment goal. Keeping in mind that these actionable steps need to be realistic, measurable, and collaborative, and involve input from both the students, their family, educators, and anyone else involved, like the job coaches or employers, to make sure that we're all on the same page and that these are realistic next steps that we can put forth. So next steps for Maria. First thing we're going to do is identify job roles or volunteer opportunities where Maria's strengths, that independent work and attention to detail, can shine. So let's have her feel the success in a workplace. Instead of feeling stressed about the social interactions, let's find some things that will really leverage her strengths and her skills. We're going to collaborate with the job coach or vocational specialist to teach Maria workplace social skills using role playing, peer mentorship, other strategies that might be successful for Maria, and really help her build up those skills outside of the workplace first. We're going to also introduce Maria to virtual job shadowing and work simulation to build her confidence and familiarity with workplace expectations. Again, in a low stakes environment, this can really provide some good opportunity for her to build that confidence and feel more comfortable with what is expected in a workplace and kind of try on for size different ways to interact with people and how she can expect things might work in the work environment. We're also going to work with Maria and her family to identify a gradual plan for increasing social engagement in a way that feels manageable and supported. So what other opportunities do we have for Maria outside of the school, outside of the direct instruction provided by her IEP team, outside of her work-based learning experience? What other places and times and opportunities do we have for Maria to continue to build her social skills? Is there a park district nearby? Is there a church group she can join? Are there other social opportunities embedded in her community or her family, or even outside of in the school environment, but outside of the school day that will really help her feel like she can build those skills in a really meaningful way, but also isn't scary and is supported? We also want to advocate for workplace accommodation. So if we're realizing that some places might just be too noisy or need for, instead of her having to go and physically talk to a person, can she email? Can she text? Can she communicate in a different way to make sure that she is able to feel safe and supported in the work environment and accommodate some of the needs that she might have to ensure that she's successful in that work experience? So let's take a look at the reframing mindsets once again. We've walked through together the definition of the four different components of that framework: the scenario, how we ask our questions, how we reframe the mindset, and then how we lay out our next steps. We also walked through an example illustrating what this framework looks like for our example student Maria previously. So let's do that again with a different kind of scenario for a student named Shaquille. As we go through this scenario, I'm going to present the example, the case study, if you will, and then I'm going to offer you the opportunity to brainstorm your own ideas, have an opportunity to kind of think of how you would structure that given the framework we've provided. And then I'll give you an example of what we came up with potential questions or reframes or next steps that would make sense to us based on that situation. So as we go through, I'm going to offer you the opportunity to pause and jot down your ideas, whether you're just pausing to kind of brainstorm mentally some things that you would want to consider given the framework or that situation, or if you want to write them down and have them documented in front of you in notes, that's totally fine as well. So listen for me to offer the pause and then restart the video when you're ready to move on to see the example provided. So let's meet Shaquille. Shaquille has limited mobility. He is nonverbal and really right now doesn't have a super standard form of communication. He also has a visual impairment and an intellectual disability. Up until this point, he's been fully in self-contained classes that are focusing on life skills and employment preparation. And when talking with the school team, they are saying, yeah, but his disabilities are too severe and he's just not ready to work. So I'm going to let you look at this slide while we talk about the next step, which is we're going to ask some questions. So again, let's, just like we're doing right now, I'm coming to you and saying, hey, I've got this student, Shaquille. Here's kind of the situation at hand with Shaquille. What kind of questions would you ask me? Pause the video right now and let me think about some of the things that you would want to ask to get a better understanding of Shaquille. When you're ready, press play and meet me on the next slide. I'm going to offer you some example questions you might want to ask to get some more information. So the first thing that I'd want to know is kind of what strategies to teach work skills have already been tried. What is or is not working up until this point. I'd also want to have a good understanding of what work experiences he's already had. What was successful about them? What wasn't? What was unsuccessful about them? I'd also want to know more about Shaquille's unique talents. So what are they? And how do those talents contribute to a workplace? And finally, I want to know a little bit more about Shaquille. What does he do in general? What is he up to outside of school on the weekends? What kind of interests does he have? So these are a few example questions I would ask about Shaquille. So after asking those questions, we're going to bring us back to reframing. So in this hypothetical situation with our student Shaquille, it turns out we don't have a lot of information. When we pose these questions, the school team couldn't offer a ton. We don't have a lot of baseline information. We don't know a lot about what Shaquille's into outside of school. He hasn't had a lot of work experiences. So it's hard for us to determine this mindset that the school team has is that his disability is too severe and has too many barriers to employment. So community-based work experiences are not realistic, but that's really only based on their opinion. They haven't tried a ton. They haven't given him a lot of opportunity. So how would you reframe this mindset to think a little bit different about Shaquille's employment potential? Pause right here and think about how you would want to reframe this mindset. When you're ready, unpause and meet me on the next slide, and I'll walk you through how I reframed his mindset. This mindset. um, this is how I reframed it. Shaquille requires further observation and assessment to determine what work environments match his skills and abilities. In turn, the team can determine the appropriate work-based learning opportunities and support he requires. Because really, like I said, in this hypothetical situation, we're just assuming the people that made these kind of yeah, but barriers are really just making assumptions. They didn't have enough information to tell me, hey, this is working, this didn't work. We need to get some more information. We need observation, we need assessment details or assessment information, just a little bit more so we can plot out what's going to be the best course of opportunity for Shaquille to meet his post-secondary employment goals. So given that reframe, what are some of the next steps you would want to take? When we talked about getting more opportunity for observation and assessment and determining work-based learning experiences, what kind of next steps would you put into play to get to that point where we can have some more information about Shaquille and set a path forward towards his employment goals? I'll let you pause right here while you think about those things. When you're ready, press play and meet me on the next slide to walk through a few of the next steps that I came up with. All right. So here are a few ideas that I have about supporting Shaquille and moving past the yeah, but barriers that he had put in front of him. So first things first, let's conduct some situational assessments in those real work settings to determine Shaquille's functional skills. As we determined, we just don't have a lot of information on it. Not a lot of things have been tried because we were just like, well, he's not working. So let's get some more information. Let's get him out in authentic work environments. Let's see what's really, where his skills really lie when we get him out into a real work setting. I also think it's going to be important to interview and talk with people who spend a lot of time with him outside of school to determine his interests and activities. So that might be family members, that could be siblings, cousins, a personal care aide, who's around him and gets to know or spends more time with him outside of school. So we can identify some of those interests and joys and activities that he really enjoys that might lend itself to some potential employment opportunities. Let's also consult with the OT and PT to see if there's any accommodations that could be made so he is more independent in the work environment. I'd also like to conduct a map of businesses around Shaquille's home to see if there's any potential future employment or work-based learning experiences that are going to be accessible. Given some of the limitations he does have with mobility and other needs, it will be really important to think about what he can realistically get to, both now and in the future. Finally, I'd like to revisit Shaquille's educational program and explore opportunities for more work-related learning, ideally in these environments with non-disabled peers. So getting him out of that self-contained kind of life skills classroom, get him spending much more time in the community with other 20-something-year-olds that are non-disabled so he can have those least restrictive environment experiences. All right, so we've walked through a couple examples, we've defined the different areas. So now we're going to just provide you a little bit more of a template and structure for this. So we have a template that you're welcome to download using the framework that we've walked through in kind of a graphic organizer kind of way. If you look in the YouTube description of this webinar, it'll link you to the resources from this webinar for you to reference. So look in the YouTube video description, you'll be able to download this template and use it for your own reframing mindsets moving forward. And really what we want you to walk away with today is that it's so important to recognize and articulate these common yeah but barriers, and that they are a hindrance and they are can get in the way of effective transition planning. And this happens to the best of us. So there's nothing wrong with having these thoughts or making these statements, but now we really need to think about, okay, yes, we're acknowledging the challenges and barriers, but we really do need to reframe them so it doesn't get in the way of us providing every opportunity and experience possible to set our students up for post-secondary employment success. We really need to be reframing these limiting beliefs and assumptions about students' employment potential, because it's essential for setting them up for meaningful post-secondary goals, specifically employment in this scenario. And we also want to make sure we're using the reframing mindsets framework because it really provides a structure to apply problem-solving strategies to develop creative, individualized solutions to all the yeah buts you encounter. And every single time that you encounter yeah but, are you going to whip out the framework and write everything down? Maybe not, but I do think you can take, after using it a few times and really using that structure, it'll allow you to kind of address these things in a thoughtful way. You might not always need the template that we provided, but the concept of moving through those different stages and really keeping things employment focused, student centered, ability focused, while also addressing the challenges is going to be a way more thoughtful way to set up the transition plan and experiences that are provided for all the students in your program. Again, all of those related resources are linked in the YouTube description for the video that you're watching right now. So it'll take you to a box folder where the resources from today's webinar are located. And if you like what you hear, make sure you're connected with us. We are constantly putting out new resources, webinars, putting on workshops. We have a conference every year. So make sure you're connected so you can stay up to date with what's going on with the Illinois Center for Transition and Work. And we look forward to seeing you at a future webinar, workshop, and thanks for being here with us today. Have a good day.